This is a podcast by Outside the Colony. My name is Bernard Sweeney. I'm an Irish traveller. I'm located here at the moment in the middle of the Pale in Dublin, but I do come from Sligo, the west coast of Ireland, a very Gaelic cultural world once upon a time. And I'm joined with a legend, and his name is Grattan Puxton. And Grafton's going to tell you a bit about himself, what he does. But for me, he's a fascinating human being and has been around longer than myself, because I wasn't even born when this guy was still running around the streets of Dublin protesting for human rights. So, Grattan Puxton, would you like to introduce yourself, tell us a little bit about yourself, and take all the time in the world?
Well, hello, Bernard. Yeah, well, I'm 82 years old now, so I'm very much a veteran. We didn't call ourselves activists back in the 60s, but I guess that's what I've been hijacked into, and I'll explain how that happens, perhaps. Because I came over to Ireland, to escape military service, to keep out the British Army. I was just a reporter on a local paper. That's in about 1960, and came over to Ireland, get out of military service, and got this place. I was in Ireland for a while, but anyway, to cut the story a little shorter, I got a piece of ground up at Bow Bridge, or down at Bow Bridge, if you like, on the west side of Dublin. And I got a wagon. I went out to Balbriggan and met some of the prices. I bought a wagon from them. I brought it down to this old property, which was very strange. You'd have to see it to believe it. It was kind of an old, very much dilapidated house, but up above it, raised above it, was this garden in the background, a little sandy lane leading into it. And I put my wagon up there because the house was hardly fit for habitation, and in fact was ordered to be pulled down within a few years. Anyway, I was up there with this wagon, and below me on the ground around Bow Bridge were some travelers with a tent. That was his name was Kevin Keenan, and we were okay, and we were sort of neighbors. And then along came this fella who I didn't, of course, know, but I knew very well soon. We called Big Bill. So that was Bill Reynolds. It turns out that his name was Bill Reynolds.
Was he a traveler?
No. This was the Dublin Corporation's chief. We called him a bailiff. It was his job to move travelers on.
His job, wow.
And he had been a blue shirt, which you probably know the history of that. He'd been on the Franco side.
Could you explain to people what blue shirt means, just in case people, I've a vague, all of an idea myself, but I'd like you to explain it just for listeners.
There was a, if I remember rightly, there was a General Duff who put this contingent together, the blue shirts, to fight on the Franco side in the Spanish Civil War. Of course, that had been years before, but anyway, there he was, a big man in a cloth cap with big boots on, came rattling up to my wagon and banging on it, and I didn't know who the hell he was, but he said, "Look, you can't stop here." Well, I said, "Hey, I've just bought this piece of ground." He said, "Never mind, there's regulations. If you're not off here in a week, I'll have you off." So I then set off with Kevin Keenan and the ones who were in the tent, and we went off up to a place called the Ring Road, which is on the edge of Ballyfermot, I think, still Dublin 8, and that's where it all started, up there on the Ring Road. But as I say, before I go into much more about that, I really want to remember some of the people that were in the traveller movement. Again, we didn't call it a movement at that time very much, but and the first person to mention is Tommy Docherty, because Tommy Docherty has the distinction of having started the very first traveller organization that I know of. Anyhow, I don't think you can beat it. 1959, Tommy Docherty was living in Leeds and formed the Society of Travelling People. And that, as I say, back in 1959, that beats anybody else, I think.
Wow.
Second person I talk about, of course, Tommy and I had great times together for years, and he was the only person who had that kind of authority and leadership quality to go around and say, look, we've got to get together in greater groups to prevent evictions. And he could call 100 trailers onto a piece of ground, you know, up in the north and up in the Midlands of Birmingham. He could get a great lot of people together and successfully did that. He was a great person to organize. Also, there was, of course, Pups Johnny Connors, who was with me in Dublin for a while, but was more active again in the Midlands. Just a great person. He was at the famous Battle of Brown Hills near Coventry, where I don't know if you know this story, but there was about 40 trailers on a piece of ground there. And they had an enormous force of police. It was like a battalion of police. They came in a formation towards us. I had my trailer there at the front, took the wheels off it, but that didn't deter them, because it was eventually that trailer was picked up and put on a low loader and taken off down the motorway about 5 miles. There was a great set to, and the local council, was a Brown Hills council, pulled all the wagons out onto the road with their tractors. And then the police closed in on us again, and they said, now you've got to shift because you are blocking the highway. And we said, wait a minute, we said. We didn't put the trailers here. We didn't give permission to anybody to touch our trailers. And I pointed to the guys with the tractors, I said, they put us out here. And, you know, we're not shifting. And so some people went off down the pub, and I stood there with Johnny Connors and argued it out. And eventually the police agreed that it was the council who blocked the road. And the council had to come back with those same tractors and pull us back onto another bit of land somewhere else.
Nice victory, nice victory.
Of course, in those days, we were glad to get an extra week or few days anywhere. But a very small site, if I remember, you know, for 10 or 15 trailers was set up, a temporary site with a standpipe. So that was, in those days, that was quite a victory. Yeah.
Absolutely. So a young journalist came over from England. You came to Dublin. You met up with travellers. You've seen their plight. Now, you said 1959, you mentioned one day traveller organisation or movement, whatever, what was at the time. To this moment, I mean, has it always been like this? Has it been like year in, year out, decade in, decade out, where the state have been either suppressing or aggressing against minorities? Would it be Roma? Would it be travellers, or so on? Is it like a non-stop battle? Non-stop.
But of course, in the older times, I'm sure you know better than me that travellers had a place in the economy, because, you know, I remember at Cherry Orchard that some people like Marty Ward, they still had their little anvils. There were special, very light anvils that you could stick in the ground. They're kind of a T-shaped anvil. I don't know if you've seen one of these.
I have, yeah.
Just stick it in the ground, and they could, you know, knock out anything on there. And I'll just show you something that I've got.
Yeah.
This is no piece of tinware, but it's a massive, great copper coal holder, if you like. But that's made by travellers and was in fact presented me as a bit of a.
Back in the early days, Grafton, there would be less plastic, I guess, and there was more need for pots, pans, buckets, cups.
Exactly. Yeah, and
so this is why. And travellers, they were like accepted or at least tolerated because they had skills. Yeah. And then when the plastic came in, and I can see where it went downhill from there. Tell us about
horse trading and all that, of course.
And did Thomas Doherty live in Dublin with yourself at the time?
Pardon?
Thomas Doherty. Did he live in Dublin or was he in England?
Tommy.
Yeah.
Well, he came later on in the story, in my own personal story.
Yeah, of course.
He was brought over to be in a show with me in the Gay Byrne late night show with Gay Byrne. Okay. But it was all a setup to destroy me. And Tommy had been sent around. I believe he'd had a meeting with Archbishop McQuaid, and it had been set up by the church and given a camera to go around England and find, dig up whatever possible dirt he could on me. But there I was under the spotlight in the Late Late Show, and Tommy came down, from the audience, and Gayburn asked him, what have you got to tell us about this man? And Tommy said, I have nothing against him. This man is, for the travelers and all that. And it was a great kind of reversal of what they intended to happen.
Oh, yeah, gotcha. You kind of, what they call, you roped it up them.
Yeah, that's right.
Well done.
Well,
there was, sorry, go ahead. Sorry, beg your pardon.
I was just going to say, I mean, that was where I met Tommy, really, in that show. But later on, he came to us when we were stopping. It was a very famous incident there. We took over this place called the Lansdowne Valley Park. I don't know if you've seen that in Dublin. It's a little park with a low wall where I believe some people lost their lives during the Rising. And so it's a little commemorative park.
Oh, and, I think I have, the Remembrance Park, they call it.
Remembrance Park there, yeah. This was quite early on, because we went through about 10 different evictions, but that was quite spectacular because we put all the wagons together in Bluebell Lane, which was then really a rural little place, with some properties there which were owned by travelers. I had a kind of scrapyard there, and some fellas, because part of this story is that there was a Republican group that supported the travelers at that time, and they went ahead. About 4 of them went ahead on bicycles, and armed with a couple of sledgehammers from this travelers' scrap yard, and they knocked down. There was 2 pillars in the way. You couldn't get a wagon through the gate of the park. There were 2 pillars there, because obviously weren't meant to get in there with vehicles, but they went ahead, knocked them down, and then we sort of galloped down the Nate Road and got in to the park, only just because as I was going in there, the hames broke and I got all detached and kind of stuck in the gateway, but a few fellas pushed that in, and the guards were right behind us. They were mad as hell. They literally run around. It's in the dusk then. They're running around the truncheons drawn, looking to see where they could blame for, breaking their way into this park and so on.
It's like a Wild Wild West story, isn't it?
It is. We put up a banner though up there and said, "Wake up, Lamass," because it was showing Lamass that time. We kept in that park for a couple of weeks prior to the only big demonstration that we held, which was a big parade with wagons down O'Connell Street with hundreds of students out of Trinity College who joined us there. Yeah, there is a picture of that somewhere.
There's an interesting story there, because when I grew up, I just taught to settle people were to settle people and where we're travelers. Simple as. There was no getting where. But when you get a bit older, you see a lot more and you see all these different class systems. But I have found and I have seen that you mentioned republics coming down, breaking down the pillars, making way for travelers. I mean, that in itself is a very Irish thing, you could say. The young students coming out of Henry VIII's College, if you want to call it for a better word, Trinity College, coming out protesting with travelers. Yeah. So there has been, despite the media we see all over the years, there was a kind of a good relationship with a lot of settled people and travelers. And was that your experience in Dublin?
Well, yes and no, because you've got supporters, but they weren't always the supporters you wanted. We had, as I said, a Republican group, which were mainly mentored by Padre O'Donnell. Padre O'Donnell was later on a senator in Dublin, a senator, Padre O'Donnell. He had been, very interestingly, the organizer of the citizen army in Donegal. So he's a real old school person.
Yeah.
and he's a fine person. And I've got a picture of him, in fact, here, where he's standing opposite our first school, the first school built on the Ring Road before it was pulled down and burnt by the corporation.
The Travellers build their first their own school.
Like that. Pardon?
The Travellers build their own school.
Yeah. The first school. I can't get it off the wall really. I'd have to heave it off the wall. Yeah. The first school was at that Ring Road place. Just Christmas 1962, coming into 63. I went off with John Mack, a young chap who was probably about 19 years old. He's about a little bit younger than me, but a young chap called John MacDonald. And we went back to that scrapyard I was telling you about, and I don't remember the name, the owners of it just for the moment.
Yeah, okay.
But they gave us, amazingly, there were 6 or 8 desks, what you call national school desks in that scrapyard. And so of course we wanted those, and we got lots of bits of wood and window and door, and we put up a very shack-like looking school just in the start of 1963. But
the Travellers feel it was important to have an education even back then.
Well, yes, but I've got to say that this was a bit of a thing that we were doing, because we'd been down to City Hall to ask for water, and they told us to fuck off. Literally, wow. That's what the manager said to us. We went down there with about 4 little pony traps, and thought ourselves great, because that was the first ever protest. We went down to City Hall, asked for that, and he told us to get the hell out of here. So our next step was, it was kind of a act of defiance to put up that school. I've got to say that.
Yeah, perfect point.
But the children were loving it, and we had sing-songs going, and we had a couple of students coming up, probably from Trinity, and started some lessons and all that. But within a week, the council were down on us again. But fortunately, or it made it more dramatic anyhow, we were in touch with the RTE, and they had the lights set. And when the eviction people arrived, which was lorry loads of council workmen, it was, of course, Big Bill was there leading it all, and Padre O'Donnell came in his lovely grey Mercedes and drove it right into the gate, so it kind of blocked the gate. And we had a couple of fires burning, and we got on and had a class going in the school, and we were singing "We Shall Not Be Moved." But Bill Reynolds put a big chain around that school. So the question was, are we going to let the roof come down on us, or are we going to have to come out? So we had to come out the school, but I made a kind of non-violent resistance in the school as long as it was possible. Yeah.
The council didn't think twice about, 1, telling you to fuck off, 2, using physical, I don't know what you call that, violence, pushing people back, breaking down their properties. I mean, there was no, I was like, if it was normal, especially when they were coming with all the workers.
And I hadn't seen all this kind of thing go on, so I didn't know what was legal and not legal, really. But the people with wagons, we all pulled out on the road. I think there were about 18 wagons there. But the people who had just their tents and little shacks that they put, that was all destroyed. A lot of stuff was destroyed. Baby clothes was destroyed. Tents were destroyed. And when we look back, because we lined up on the road with a tricolor flag at the front, Republican flag at the front, to kind of emphasize that we were, where is the proclamation of the Republic? How does that apply to us? Where's that promise that everyone in Ireland should,
That's
should have
right.
life?
Never happened, 1922. Just reminds me, have you got relatives that come from Ireland?
Yeah, I have. Oh, yeah. My grandparents were from Gorey, County Wexford. Yeah.
You already had the Irish connection, so.
I had Irish connections, in several ways, yeah.
Tell me, because I don't know if this part is true or not. Because when you're younger, when you come into the movement, you hear all the rumors that once happened, and you hear all about these legends, including yourself. But I heard one time the council, and it could well be Mr. Reynolds for all I know, by the sounds of him, Big Bad Dan. But it was a case that they're almost blackmailing the travellers. They were saying, we will give ye drinking water if you destroy your homes and move into houses. Is there any truth in that kind of stuff?
Well, I don't know about the drinking water version, but it was a policy that if you wanted to move into a house, which some people did try, you had to surrender your wagon. And Big Bill put a match to it. They burnt the wagon, and that wagon was going to be, say, the most valuable thing that family might have. And they would have to sacrifice their wagon to go up in flames in order to move into a house, say in Ballyfermot or one of the other estates.
It was almost making a statement from the state. Your culture does not belong here.
Yeah.
We're literally putting it up in flames. We don't value it.
You can destroy it. I mean, the whole point of the, we're going around in circles here a bit, but when the Commission on Itinerancy made its report, it was quite clear that the point of the report was assimilation, see the disappearance of the travellers. The travellers were going to have to be, stop travelling, to put it very bluntly.
Just for people that may not have heard of the 1963 report, and I just tell you what I think I know of it. Basically, it was a government-issued report. Some travellers believed it was because JFK was due to come back to Ireland and they wanted to rid of this eyesore. Others believed because Fianna Fáil at the time started doing deals with the Americans or bringing in international investment. So basically, the 1963 report was about forced assimilation, with the impression that they were being nice and polite and kind and giving people opportunities and choices. But now we're hearing, as we just did, burning of wagons, the institutionalization of young children, travellers up and down the country that never met each other, were now linked by this 63 report that seen them as the others. Now, we know the report itself talked language like the final solution. You mentioned earlier on, surprisingly enough, that there was a blue shirt vibe about Dublin or Ireland. They literally were blue shirts. So this was before the 1963. Now they're using language like the final solution, which is the same language that was used in Germany. We've seen in some of the reports I had is that they were also talking about how they would label travellers so the police would recognize us. And the only reason they scrapped it was because they said it would be too expensive. This is 1963, 14, 15 years after Germany. Before Germany, they already had that mentality of the others and the minorities. So the 63 report has been a living, terrifying experience right this moment for Irish travellers. So I thought I'd give that, unless you would like to add to that or take anything away from it, but that's my impression from it.
It was, that's what it was. You're not exaggerating at all. Of course, there was pretty well, very, very little consultation with the travellers at that time. There was supposed to be an inquiry into to speak to travellers. And of course, just labeling travellers itinerants was somehow a bit of a degrading too. So Judge Walsh, the only person that I know of that he met was Joe Donoghue, because they had a meeting up at Ballyfermot at a social centre. And at that time, the travellers were up in a place they called the California Hills. I don't know if you've ever heard of that. The California Hills was a big stopping place. A lot of people were up there, but they had also suffered an attack by vigilantes up there. This was probably a couple of years before I arrived, but wagons had been pushed over and people hurt. And they were on the ring road because they'd had to evacuate from the California Hills. They went down onto that factory land near the Grand Canal on the ring road. So that's where I joined up with them.
It sounds like it feels like a very busy, almost frightening life for young children to be involved, because all these stories we hear about has an element of violence attached to it. It has people coming out in big cars, putting chains around buildings, telling people to fuck off, denying them water and access. mean,
Well,
that's a trauma ongoing, isn't it?
it was. Well, we as I said, we lined up on the ring road. We only went a couple of miles. We went down to the Long Mile Road, crossed over there into Walkingstown, and it was just getting to evening time, so we had to stop somewhere. And we'd been looking back and seeing these little fires all over the old ring road place where they set fire to the school and the little huts, and everything was gone. So we were in a pretty desperate mood, and so a couple of us jumped off and went to and pulled down some fencing, and we got onto a very narrow strip of land. It's probably been built on by now, but there was a narrow strip of land just at the corner of Walkingstown Avenue and the Long Mile Road, and that's where we pulled all the wagons in there. It was about 7 o'clock in the evening, and we just got settled in and probably getting something to eat when a squad car came down there and drove right onto the land, and there was an inspector there with three guards, and I'm not kidding you. First of all, his breath smelled of whiskey, drink, and he said, "If you are not out of here in 1 hour, we'll be coming back and burn you out." He said that. We'll burn you out. We'll burn you out if you're not moved now. Well, we hadn't anyone to go, so we stuck it out. And nothing happened, so kind of a bluff. So luckily we kind of stood the bluff and stood our ground. And I remember Nan Donahue was there, and she was one of the people who was kind of calming me down. She said, never mind the pig-faced bastards, you know, pig-faced bastards. You know, we'll eat them for our breakfast, she said, if they come back. Anyway, so we made our corner.
Yeah, you mentioned earlier on, which is kind of a nice little surprise too. You mentioned 2 men that you knew, which might be a bit biased, but initially, 1959, they started up the first maybe travel organization.
Yeah,
Nan
Donahue was in a very bad way at that time, and she had about 6 children with her, and pushing stuff around in a pram and God knows what. But you know, she was with us. That was Nan Donahue, because Nan Donahue was a sister of Joe Donahue, and old Pa Donahue, who one leg. I'm sure travelers will remember him because he had one leg. He was from Mullingar, and he'd had an accident on the railway sometime, and he was with us. He had one leg. Pa Donahue was a lovely man, and their sister was Nan Donahue.
And may I ask, what year was that roughly about?
Well, we're just talking about the early 1960s, you know,
the early 1960s.
Yeah.
To me, when you look at the pictures, you see these women in black and white in the 1960s, outstanding, proud, with signs and placards and saying, look, we are human beings. We need to live. It seems a lot of this stuff was happening even before the civil rights had started in Northern Ireland.
It came. We were several years ahead of the Northern Ireland civil rights movement, but we had a connection with it. Eamonn McCann, you'll know his name. He came down and stopped with us at a place which was the 7th Lock. We had an eviction at the 7th Lock. Eamonn McCann was with us. And later on, Bernadette Devlin joined the Gypsy Council and was at a big meeting. We had to get together on the Derby Epsom Downs, because every year travellers get together on the Epsom Downs. But one year they tried to stop us. So we said we'd stop the Derby. This was about 1967, after I'd gone back to England. Bernadette Devlin was with us there. Yeah, in fact, I've just been writing a bit about her, catching up on her history, because
I haven't met the woman in person, but I'm very familiar and aware of a wonderful human being. And Eamonn McCann, I can say the same thing. I met him a couple of times. A wonderful, loud man.
Yeah, he was terrific. He was only a very young chap when he came down to stop with us in a little tent. He had brought a little tent, and a couple of them with the other chaps I can't remember. But the biggest thing that, perhaps the biggest thing Bernadette Devlin did with us was all very spontaneous at a place called Turkey Street. This is in North London, and just we were making a little stand there, and of course we're going to be evicted. And she happened to be giving a lecture in the local technical college. So we went in there, it was all spontaneous, and she got the whole student body of that college to come out, which was about 700 students. And we all marched with the travelers at the front, and we're very close to taking over the local police station. We got there, they just about got their people in front of us. There was a big sit down in front of that station. That was a good day. Yeah.
Yeah, I can imagine them.
She was terrific. But Bernadette, great person.
Absolutely. Hopefully I'll get to meet her sometime. I actually get her on for a podcast.
Because they say she was related to the Delphi Devlins, who were travelers who went around obviously selling China and stuff from I suppose also from Cookstown, where she was from.
Wow, yeah. Well, like I said before, we keep going back. You can keep removing the labels, and you'll find human beings that were connected throughout the centuries in colonization. And then in 1922, of course, Ireland never changed any of them colonial systems. This is why I maintain today that the state still sees Irish travellers as the English wants to see the Irish. If you look at the treatment of Irish travellers, it's very similar what the English did to the Irish. It's very similar what the Protestants did to the Catholics. And it seems to be unchanged. The other thing I was going to mention, because all them stories started long before I was even born. But even today now, it seems to me that travellers are worse off today than they were throughout any of them times. Psychologically, for one, we see with the suicides, the drug use, almost a loss of identity at this stage. And people are in a kind of an identity crisis. Would you like to talk anything about that, or any references?
Well, the way I want to kind of frame it is that once we broke into Cherry Orchard, and mine was the first wagon in there. We'd been stopping on a place called the Back Road, which goes between Palmerston and the Fever Hospital there at Cherry Orchard. We broke in and we got a huge piece of land, and travellers were coming from all over Ireland to that piece of land. And that's another person I want to remember, and that's Larry Ward, who came up from Loughcray with 8 wagons. Took him about a week to come up and join us there. It's a terrific reinforcement.
Wow.
And the thing is, there's a great spirit, you see, at Cherry Orchard. We rebuilt our school. We call that St. Christopher's 2. I've got a picture of that on the wall here too. And there was a tremendous community, and we were looking after ourselves. You know, people who had, you know, we're helping each other. I mean, there was it was weird. This was a lesson for me, but when we first moved in there was people in Bender tents, practically on the bare earth, with just a bit of straw between them and the earth. But after a few months, when we felt more secure, people started to build shacks. Well, shacks might look very poor, but they were a lot better than tents, because we used to put in wooden floors. You only had to get a few pallets and make a wooden floor and so on. So we were a community, we were helping ourselves. And then along came the people who wanted to help. Well, they were our supporters, but it was wrong. It was wrong, because we had a great meeting there was a Father Fihili, who was the chaplain, he'd been made the Travers chaplain. There was Lady Wicklow, and there was Victor Bewley. They were the main people. Now, Victor Bewley, I wouldn't say was a great person. He was a Quaker, and he owned the Bewley cafes. You know? And he took 4 wagons onto his own land. That's how far it'd go. But nothing was done for the people at Cherry Orchard. There was a public fundraising, which collected £10,000. That was all in the hands of Father Feely. If you now wanted something, it wasn't any longer about self-help. You would go to his door and beg for it. See what I mean?
God, yeah,
so the whole initiative of a community doing something for itself, our spirits were in a way broken by that. We had the school, but they wanted to ship the children downtown in a bus and to get some kind of teaching by the Little Sisters of Charity. The children didn't like that. one little boy came back and he'd been shut in a cupboard because he wouldn't keep still in the desk. Well, traveling children, how are you going to keep still in a desk when you're used to running around the place? But we were running this little school with some student help on the lines of the Montessori schools, which meant you worked on whatever you wanted to work on, little bits of equipment, and you could leave and go out and then come back again. And people were so happy in that school, and altogether about 76 children and adults had classes there. People didn't want to leave at the end of the class because we had to have, you know, roundabout, we had to have a class that came for an hour and then another lot of people come in, you know, to give everybody a turn. But it was quite hard to get the people who would come on the first session to leave to let the second session in. That's how great it was. So, you know, people came forward and the Quakers provided milk for the school. The Republicans provided a kind of honor guard, if you like, because they marched up and down with justice for itinerants. But the thing about the Republicans was they would not join in the type of resistance that we developed. You'll see a picture of it somewhere where we're all on the ground. As my wagon is in the gap. This was at 7th Lock, where Eamonn McCann was. And we just got on the ground and clutched onto the shafts of the wagon and the wheels and all that to do a non-violent type of resistance, you know. And the Republican chaps were walking up and down with this justice for itinerants, but they wouldn't join. They didn't want to join in this thing where you sit down, you know. It's all stand up and get violent. you know the different ideology there going on.
Yeah, it seems like
our tactics won because a lot of the workmen walked off the job.
Wow.
Because a young steward from one of the flats somewhere at Crumlin, I think, got up and said that the Transport and General Workers Union had passed a resolution saying no member should take any hand act or part in this kind of eviction work. So someone went off and there was only 7 guys left there, 7 corporation men, to move the last wagons off that patch of ground at the 7th Lock. So what did we do? We got 15 people inside one wagon. It was bulging with people.
Wandering wagon.
and Bill Reynolds put himself in the shaft to pull it out.
It's like something out of a movie.
It was like, well, I wish we'd made a movie at the time, yeah, because the woman whose wagon it was, she was trying to feed the baby with a pan of milk. So she went to the door of the wagon and threw that over, scorched him, threw this whole pan of milk over his shoulders, you know. And that was the end of that eviction. You know, we won. We stopped it.
Well done.
Yeah, why not? Yeah.
For me, because I was involved with activism and setting up traveler organizations.
Yeah.
And again, sometimes you meet these people that are sincere and serious. And then you'll meet other people who are very sincere, but are not really serious about getting down and with it and making these changes. And for me, because I've been kind of in conflict with some of the travel organizations for the last almost 20 years, not something that I wanted to do. But at the same time, I knew I came from a very broken, traumatized background myself. But I also, with that, I also had a proud element of our people and our culture. So I was always that kind of angry conflict with the settled people, putting us down or thinking there was something wrong with us and they were somehow superior. So of course, a little longer you understand that there's a big difference between education and intelligence. And then you get a little older, you're starting to say, hold for a second, this is not even our education. It's not even their education. All these systems and institutions were created through the 1600s conquest of Ireland and had never changed in 1922. And here we are, who were excluded, ostracized, demonized, criticized, brutalized throughout the centuries. So we're like a walking ball of trauma in ourselves. But what I find today is that it's still going the wrong direction. Actually, it's escalating in the wrong direction because the settled people who are helping us have it in their ideology that they are the Irish by default that
Yeah.
they are the normal
Yeah.
community, and that
Yeah.
we needed we needed their help. I've
Yeah.
seen this even today with travel organizations, and I am convinced of it, my friend. This is related to the psychological issues travelers are having today. It's because we're being stripped of our identity. Now we got travel organizations that are called Traveller and Roma organizations.
Mm.
And of course, I love the flag behind you. I know Roma people. Nothing wrong with their community or their culture, very similar to our own. But
Yeah.
it's slightly different in that its origins, its history. So we come from an Irish indigenous background,
Yeah.
a Gaelic culture. The wonderful Roma, who very similar like ourselves, were kings, queens,
On the road.
leaders.
Yeah.
Yeah, came from northern India and other places like this, and were ruling class people themselves at one time or another, or whatever the reason may be. But here in Ireland, they've adapted Traveller and Roma as one group, and their
Yeah.
organizations are they're funding this, supporting this. And for me, and it's frustrating because we feel as travellers we're being excluded from our own organizations. Like when you mentioned earlier about the priest and the blankets, there was only one person you had to go now and you had to beg them. Well, I
Yeah.
feel
Well,
that's where we're at now with the organizations.
well, what completely encapsulates this, that we had started this thing and we called it the Dublin Itinerant Settlement Committee, which isn't a great name, but they took that name, and it was a traveller committee, Dublin Traveller Settlement Committee, Cherry Orchard Committee. They took it, but no travellers were any longer on it. No travellers were any longer on it. And that's how I think it went right up to, then there was a national committee, look, it's supposed to, do things for travellers, but there were no travellers on it. And I only realized later, I became a little bit more sophisticated. I realized that what the difference was, that there were people who would come along and they'd want to do something for you, yeah, rescue you, very paternalistic, but not with you and not activating the community. Because in all those evictions, although they were horrible, there was also a kind of a proudness, because we knew we were fighting for ourselves and we stood up for ourselves, and people got a great spirit out of that. But when everything's taken out of your hands, you've got no political power at all, any influence, then of course that's when the apathy comes in and the drink comes in and the destruction of a whole culture comes into it.
Yeah. Do you know how the Roma are getting on in Ireland? I mean,
I haven't heard lately. I do hear from one or two people, but I haven't got a running sort of commentary. I heard about that terrible murder of the girl that was some years ago, was found dead up and
the kidnapping of their children because they had blonde hair. We had an incident in Ireland also. It just seems to be something with the state and these others, they call them. And oddly enough, what's wonderful now about the history and the science that we're learning is that we can now turn around and say to settled people that not all settled people came from settled world. They didn't come from the colonial world. Many even got Irish names like ourselves. And like ourselves, who were broken down by the state through the Magdalen laundrines, through one form of suppression or another, taken as children, brought into institutions, re-educated, come out the other side, and are now looking down on us, calling us tinkers and gypsies and knackers and all the names you can come into, not realizing that a few decades, if not sooner or longer, they would have came from the same world as our own, the same culture.
Yes.
And that's one of it's one of the sad things and one of the good things to find out about science and history is now that we can hold our own at a very intellectual kind of level, because we have it. We can say, look at it. You can talk to us till the cows come home, but you were colonized, and you hadn't changed the systems, and them systems have continued to attack Irish travellers and have driven us psychologically over the edge. So you can wipe us out if you want to, but you'll never be Irish, because we are the last of the Irish. That's my message.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, then, bit of Republic.
Well, looking into the future, of course, I think travellers are very good at adopting and probably be the survivors of climate change. But we've been. I mean, talking of Britain, we've been dealt a terrible blow with Brexit, because the whole continent was opening up, and some of the people who were at Cherry Orchard, their grandchildren are the people who built Dale Farm, who put Dale Farm together. It was that generational thing. The O'Brien.
Wow, I did not.
Yeah, yeah. Flynn's and O'Brien's particularly, who were at Cherry Orchard. Their grandchildren were at Dale Farm. And they had businesses. They had containers. When people at Dale Farm, they had containers coming from China loaded with furniture, and they were dealing in furniture on that kind of scale. And they were traveling out as far as Sweden, Poland. Spain was nothing to them. France, Germany, and sharing camping places with some of the Sinti in Germany, they told me. But that's
what do you miss it?
That stopped. That stopped, unfortunately, with Brexit. Brexit.
Do you miss it? It has, and I think there's even with here in Ireland, we don't have the Brexit concern, and I've actually, if anything, they seem to do to kind of take I would say advantage. You take a certain satisfaction in seeing Britain suffer as a result maybe of historical events, but at the same time, they cannot realize that they're doing the exact same thing as the British were doing. It was like, you ever hear that saying where the oppressed becomes the oppressor? Yeah. Well, in Ireland's case, it's where the colonized became the colonizers, because they've continued in practices onto travellers to this moment. But I was going to ask you, do you have any favourite memories in Dublin with the travellers? Like singers, songwriters, musicians, piss takers? I'm sure there had to be quite a few piss takers.
Well, of course, the Furies. The Furies were living in a house there in Ballyfermot, and I was often in their house with Finn Barr, and they'd come out to the ring road first. I remember Teddy Fury coming out there and said, he said, they'll never let you stop here. He said, what's the point in building a school? They'll put it down. He was dead right. But they came up then to Cherry Orchard and played, and also the Dubliners did.
Luke Kelly and them.
Luke Kelly was a terrific supporter. Yeah.
Yeah, well, who did I hear mention that? Well, actually, I heard young John Connors mention that the Dubliners, Jimi Hendrix, I believe, and a couple of more of them, young musicians, would come over and mix and mingle with the travellers, sing songs and the whole lot.
Yeah, that's right. We had great sing songs up at Cherry Orchard. Yeah. Daddy Keenan too, who was a top piper. He's been in America for many years since, but he was a young chap of about 80 at that time. The pipes.
Would you say it's fair to say then that travellers were very educated, intelligent people, that if they had containers coming from all over the world, there were business people, there were musicians, there were gifted, talented, and the only thing then there was what? The default. The only thing that the state didn't like was this culture of theirs. Didn't like their wagons and their nomadism. Didn't like them being cheeky, for sure, anyway. So that was, it's an unfortunate sequence of events, because I grew up around that. I mean, uncles, cousins, nephews took suicide. All these abuses went on from a very young age, being called tinkers, gypsies, all this kind of stuff. And one thing here now, you're talking about it, and I can relate to it because I've lived it. But at the same time, there's travellers right this moment living the exact same thing. It's almost like we're outside this kind of mentality shield, that on one side they're programmed to see us this way and this way only. It's a very unfortunate state of affairs, my friend. Yeah,
it's a clash really between travellers and settled, because there's two different, you see Westerns about it, don't you? You see about the homesteaders, and they don't want the ranchers to come in with their herds and all that. Well, it's a very ancient, but unfortunately, it's the settled folk that make all the laws, and they make plenty of laws against the travellers, which is exactly what's happening in Britain now with the
other part of it too.
The
other part of it also, Grattan, I'm going to let you go soon because I realise my phone is starting to die off. But the other part of that is that we do not, and I'm sure, I don't want to put words in your mouth, but we don't, I never had it, the same animosity or hate or contentment or dislike for settled people in the same way settled people have it for our people. Because it's just a weird situation, because we don't hate the people, we've nothing against the people. And actually, the more we get more familiar with it, we realize a lot of them people actually came from our world. The people that didn't actually came from the old colonial English mentality, which would explain why they never changed the systems in 22.
Yeah.
So they have that control that we talk about, they make the laws. Well, they're all just adding on to old English laws against Irish people now labelled travellers. So it's that ancient cultural clash you're talking about, I imagine.
Well, yes, that's right. Yeah, well, of course, for many people who feel that the Republic never became, you know, the socialist republic that some had fought for originally in the citizen army and all that.
That's right.
So great big disappointment for Larkin and those people, the trade union people and the citizen army.
James Condley, all these people that died for the.
Yeah.
But I'm hoping part of me believes and feels also that we are now, in generally, globally, that we're smarter, more intelligent people. That we're not 1916, we're not 1922, we're not 1963. And hopefully in some way we can negotiate an understanding around historical trauma. Because if Ireland has never dealt with its own trauma, that means it's living in denial of its own trauma.
Yeah.
So I'm thinking hopefully we can decolonize Ireland. And
we've gone a long way in that direction in the recent years. It's huge changes have taken place, haven't they?
Yeah. And we're going to try to get a life-size statue of yourself in Dublin, outside the Dublin City Council. Is there anything I'd like to say and finish up with? And I'm sorry for cutting you short. It's just I'm down to 3% of my damn cheap phone.
Okay, Grattan, that's good.
But I'd like you to say goodbye. And I'm personally, for me, I'm very grateful for all you have done. And I'm sure many travellers that never met you and probably will never meet you, somehow or another, that our life has been that little bit better because there are people like yourself, Eamonn McCann, Bernadette Miss Kumsky, and so on and so forth. So I would like to personally thank you.
But I'd like to say, you know, a great thank you to the people who did make the stand at Cherry Orchard. And I was with the Jerry, Luke, and Martin Wall, and the O'Briens and Flynns, who I've mentioned a little bit, and everybody who was there, the Cashes and the Connors. Great people.
Thank
you
very much.
And the great adapters. They will be the ones that head humanity through climate change and come out the other side of it. I'm sure of it.
It's quite possible. We'll see how it goes. But look at till the next time we talk, my friend, keep well, look after yourself, and thank you for everything you've done.
Okay.
Take care. God bless. Bye-bye.
Lovely to talk to you. Okay.